Hi, my name is Jess Richardson, and I am going to talk to you about trafficking, sex work, and the Bible today. I am a trafficking survivor, and I have shared this stuff for many years, but I have not had the opportunity recently to really kind of put these things together. And so, really, in the last 12 hours, I started throwing presentations together, old ones, new ones, and just wanted to get some misconceptions out of the way and really start talking about some of these things more openly. Since my book came out a month ago, it is time. But I just want to jump in real quick. Hi, my name is still Jess. I went public with my story in 2009, and speaking gave me the most amazing opportunity, and that was when I shared my story so publicly. It establishes trust very, very quickly. And I had hundreds of trafficking survivors come to me, but then also survivors of all other kinds. And it really gave me an opportunity to listen, learn, and understand in a way that I think a lot of people don't have the opportunity to. And it was because I was sharing my story, trust was established. Along the way, what I learned was many of my initial ideas about rescue and how to help and how do we stop trafficking. Those initial ideas weren't actually correct. And even though I was a survivor of trafficking, it took a number of years of doing the work with other survivors for me to start to see a bigger picture. And that ended up with the exile. We were like exiled from the church, from the anti-trafficking community, and it was a really difficult time. Ended up taking a 5-year break and then publishing my book and now talking about it. So I was wrong, and I'm not mad or upset that anyone else is wrong, because I was wrong at one point too. And if I've survived it and I was wrong, how much easier would it be to be wrong if you had not had the experiences within the sex industry? So I have compassion for you. I just want to teach you. So I am a survivor of both domestic, I'm US born, domestic and international sex trafficking, or trafficking into the sex industry, as I prefer to call it. And let's flip through this. So within the anti-trafficking movement, we hear this phrase a lot, the voice of the voiceless. And that's really just synonymous now. I first remember hearing about it within like the pro-life movement, and now I'm hearing it, and have been for the last decade, within the anti-trafficking movement. And I was like, but I have a voice. Why are people speaking for me? I have a voice. I'm a survivor. I want to talk. Why can't I do the talking for myself? I'm not voiceless. And so I started doing research years ago about where this comes from. And it's really an absolutely fascinating passage. So I took it in from three different versions of the Bible. I have NLT, American Standard, and King James. It is Proverbs 31:8. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. And that's where it comes from. Totally makes sense. It's right there. That's the scripture. And the variations of the different versions, open thy mouth for the dumb, in such cause of all such are as appointed to destruction. And so when we start to use dumb instead of voiceless, what does that really mean? And honestly, I can see how the voice of the voiceless came from this scripture. But what I really want to show you is the bigger passage, because when you look at all of Proverbs 31, it's really a very interesting set of scripture. So I have it in both the King James and the American Standard. I'm going to read from the American Standard because it's a little bit easier to understand for me, and so maybe it is to you as well. So Proverbs 31:1, the words of King Lemuel, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to call him King L. The words of King L, the oracle which his mother taught him. So his mom taught him something, and so he's quoting mom. What, my son? Oh, what? O son of my womb, and what, O son of my vows? Give not thy strength unto women, So don't get rid of your power to women. Totally good. We shouldn't give up our power to anyone. I'm tracking with you. Nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. So don't do what kings who destroy themselves do either. It is not for the kings, O-L, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes to say, where is strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law. Stop right there. So mom's saying, son, don't drink the wine. It's not for you. It's not for kings. It's not for princes. Because if they drink the wine, they might forget the law. And then we finish 5. And pervert the justice due to any that is afflicted. So don't become overwhelmed. Stay clear-headed and focus on, do not pervert the justice due to any that is afflicted. Then it says, this is where it gets really interesting. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish. What? So you get them drunk when they're about to die? Let's jump over to King James Version. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. So American Standard says, and wine unto the bitter soul. So they're saying actually give wine to people who have a heavy heart or who are bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. Go to King James. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his misery no more. Same thing, either one. And then it says, open thy mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such who are left destitute. Open thy mouth, judge righteously, and minister to justice to the poor and needy. When I read the bigger picture of this, I'm like, what is really being said here? It's saying, give wine to those, the leaders, be clear-headed. But those who have a bitter soul, whose hearts are hurting from poverty, let them drink and then go take care of them. That is totally different than taking the voice from people who want to talk or the voice of the voiceless. That is an entirely different context. And it's actually a model that is taught globally in a lot of other places, but not so much in the US. It's what's called harm reduction. It's actually helping people reduce their pain and then serving them and meeting them where they're at. That is what this is saying. It's not just the voice of the voices. It's actually saying, like, get them drunk because they have heavy hearts and they're being burdened by the weight of poverty, and then go and help them. That is totally different than what I always believed about what the Bible says. And honestly, it's a perfect example of a harm reduction model. So what is harm reduction? Harm reduction is a principle that's used mostly in like drug addiction. And this is actually, oh heck, I didn't copy and paste where it is. It's harmreduction.org is where this is cut and pasted from. You can just Google it, harmreduction.org. It's a set of practical strategies. I like it already, practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. Now, when I first heard about harm reduction, I was like, yeah, I totally get that. You just help them make better choices. You can't, it's so hard to quit all drugs, all promiscuity, everything all at the same time. Like, it's just so difficult. You cannot like stay sane if you have been struggling with being trafficked, doing drugs, drinking too much, all of these things. How do you modify all the behavior all at once? Harm reduction says there is an easier way. Like, let's choose safer paths. But does harm reduction work with other things besides just drugs? And really the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. When I first heard about this model, I realized it was something I had done in my own life a lot and have continued to do with any type of behavior modification that I'm wanting to implement for myself. How about weight loss? This picture on the, I don't know what it will be for you, but it's on my left, is me at 21 years old. When I found out I was pregnant with my oldest, who is right there and barely a month old at the time, she's 19 now. When I found out I was pregnant with her, I was 140 pounds. I quit doing all drugs and alcohol in one day. It was the most excruciating time of my life. And I gained 190 pounds during that pregnancy. It was too much behavior modification, too quick, but my love for my child caused me to take action in an entirely different way. But what I learned along the way was how to find this balance and really heal my relationship with food. Harm reduction is really just a no shame model. Do better. Do better every day. Take baby steps forward. Do better, little steps, little steps, little steps every day, because the impact you can make over the long term within your life is so much powerful than the relapse, try, relapse, try, relapse, try, relapse. That cycle is so easily preventable by being kind to yourself and then not allowing other people to be like, oh, are you sure you're supposed to do that? Yeah. I went from eating an entire box of Nutty Bars every day to eating one package of Nutty Bars a day, till now I think I've probably had one package of Nutty Bars in the last 5-6 years. It's not so extreme. It's eliminating shame and making better choices, because shame is not a healthy tool for behavior modification. It just adds to guilt, to depression, to so many other things. And so harm reduction can work with any kind of behavior modification. It's simply being kind to yourself and eliminating shame. But sexual shaming is so deep-rooted in our culture. And a lot of this has to do with really our country. I'm in the US, our US being built on a religious Puritan type platform. That was the origins of our country. And it was that there's these moralistic ideas, and I'm not against morals, but I'm really against shame and hurting people and doing more harm than good. And that's why I'm teaching this. So shaming is deep-rooted in our culture. When a sexually abused child hears about abstinence education without understanding consent, they automatically feel shame, because consent is so critical and important. We have to understand that if something happened to us before we knew we had the right to say no because we were little, that awareness of the abstinence education causes so much more damage. And then we wonder why children, teenagers, rebel. The next point, when children are called perverts for asking questions, as parents, it is our job to talk to them about sexuality, about consent. What's okay for my body? What's okay? Like, can I force my body on someone else? Like, and you see this in childhood with the poking each other. Like, if you have more than one child and they just touch each other, no, that's a violation of consent. These are things that are so important, but when parents dismiss questions because it makes them uncomfortable, that's where we get this horrible cycle of shame. Children are curious. We are sexual beings. That's why our species exists. And it's designed to be fun and stress relief and like something to be shared. Sex is awesome. But when parents are not able to talk about it without being uncomfortable, or kids are asking questions that seem inappropriate because they heard something and they're coming to the parent to be like, what does this mean? That is our opportunity to really be able to explain it to them, remove the shame, teach consent, and help them understand how to have responsibility for their own bodies. But why does this happen? Why is this in existence? So here we go. My girlfriend Rahab. In biblical times, people were normally referred to with their name and the location of their origin, where did they come from, their lineage, who is their father or mother, or their occupation. For Rahab, it was her occupation that stood out. That's why she was Rahab the prostitute. Always Rahab the harlot. That's who she was. And she was clearly a businesswoman. She knew how to get what she wanted, and she knew how to live. She was willing to even lie to get it. So here in Joshua 2, this is the NLT, you can read the whole story of Rahab and how she let the spies come in, she lied for them, and then swung a deal. And this was what was so profound, because I think as people look at trafficking, they don't realize that it's the commercial aspect that makes trafficking unique. And whether you're trafficked or a sex worker, you know how to swing a deal, because it is that negotiation that actually makes trafficking trafficking, because it's the commercial aspect that's played into it. And the vast majority of survivors I've talked to had to do their own negotiation. It was some kind of a quota or some other kind of threat that they had to fill. But they had to do the sales work themselves, which is part of why everything I know I learned from my pimp, because I had to learn how to do those negotiations. So you read through it from Joshua 1 all the way down to 21, is them actually coming in, her hiding, her lying, protecting them, swinging a deal, and then finally she's like, I accept your terms, she replied, and she sent them on their way, leaving the scarlet rope hanging from the window. That was her part of the deal. She helps them go. She's saved by hanging the scarlet letter or the scarlet ribbon in the window. Moving forward to Joshua 6, she's still referred to as Rahab the prostitute. And the others in her house will be spared because she protected our spies. God didn't condemn Rahab. In fact, God honored the deal, even though she lied, even though she was a prostitute. And she's still being referred to as a prostitute. That scarlet letter is actually pretty tough to shake, and kind of the point of this. So God honored the deal. But we jump into Hebrews. She was almost always referred to as a prostitute over and over and over again. In fact, the only time I could find where she was not referred to as Rahab the prostitute, and that's not an absolute, there may be somewhere in there, I don't know. But in my research, that was the only place I could find where she was not referred to as Rahab the prostitute, is in Matthew 1:5. And it is in the actual lineage of Jesus. So she made it all the way to the lineage of Christ. And since she is an example of Christ's freedom and forgiveness, I really want to pose the question, what does it take to be able to remove that stigma of being a prostitute? Because every other time, all the way through the Bible, she was Rahab the prostitute. Also, Rahab, we have no clue how old Rahab was when she started. She could have been a child. In today's society, maybe she was a trafficking survivor. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know. But we do know that she was clearly capable and wanted a solution to not die, but she had to take action herself. If God can put a prostitute in the bloodline of Christ, why can't we treat them, me, people like me, people who have that scarlet letter, like we have our own voice and power? The stigma of being trafficked, the stigma of being a sex worker, the stigma of being a prostitute is so incredibly damaging because of this. You get death threats, lots of them. I've had certified mail sent to me, death threats. I have experienced massive amounts of silencing in the church. In my book, I talk about a friend who committed suicide over it. The silencing, the stigma, the harassing is absolutely off the chain. And it sounds, this is a woman, these are comments just from the last 2 weeks. I don't know what your book is about, but if you were a whore, I hope your book doesn't sell, and I hope you die like whores should. Then over here, most women are not tied to a bed. They use that excuse to get when they want to get out with no consequences for the lives they destroyed. They do what they do willingly and accept money for it. No concern. So I had asked her if she knew what trafficking was. No concern for the consequences of those whose lives they impact. Believe me, I've been down that rabbit hole, watching plenty of lives destroyed. Just the title of your book, Everything I Know I Learned from My Pimp, says you willingly went along with whatever you did. Because you didn't learn good lessons, because you don't learn good lessons, certainly not lessons worth writing about in a positive way by titling it such, for something you didn't do willingly. I don't know you, don't know your story, don't care to know your story. Just know that anyone who would title a book as such is proud of the work they've done, proud they destroyed other people's lives. Strippers and whores get paid a hell of a lot more than wives, so I'm sure you're pretty rich already. I guess you thought it was marketable to make a pimp into a hero, as your title expresses you learned. This is something that happens every single week. It was not even hard for me to go back. I was like, what happened last week? That. In fact, it happened so much that this is parts of a blog post that I wrote years ago when we were in California. It was a little bit bitter, a little bit cynical. I did not put it in the book because it was a little bit bitter and a little bit cynical, but I want you to hear my heart and how much pain there was associated with this awakening. I start out with deep sarcasm. I don't have a mahogany desk. I don't have a lavish lifestyle. What was happening is I was being called out very harshly by the anti-trafficking movement for being a pimp or the pimp lobby. When I started writing about sex work, I had no idea what would happen next. The death threats flowed. I was told that I should be beaten and raped. My young children too. I was called a pimp in the pimp lobby, and I should be killed for my words. Then the threats started happening to my friends, then my oldest daughter. So what is the pimp lobby? And honestly, I couldn't find anything in the Urban Dictionary, but I found out that it was used by a few very vocal anti-trafficking feminist advocates who want to suppress anybody who doesn't agree with them on the concepts of basically legalization, in that all buyers need to be locked away, all traffickers need to be locked away. And honestly, I'm so reminded of the words of Martin Luther King Jr., hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Hate only brings more hate. We have to go deeper, and we have to learn in a way that we have not done before. That is why I am doing this. The logic behind these statements was baffling to me. So a pimp or a trafficker is someone who utilizes force, fraud, or coercion to exploit another individual regardless of age. That being said, why on earth would pimps decide, remember I'm being called a pimp, why would pimps decide to join forces and take political action? They're already winning. We, as in general Americans and the world, can't even define the terms correctly. While they're benefiting from our discord, real pimps have one thing in mind, and that is to make money. And then this is a quote from a book Pimpology, page 48. I didn't grab it. I have it in the other room. His name was Ken Ivey, I believe. He says, it ain't often that I speak of love, but when I do, it's pimpin' I'm speaking of. Ain't no love in this shit. A real pimp only wants a woman to work, work, work until that pussy hole squirt. If it doesn't, he doesn't give a fuck about nothing but the money. I think it's pretty clear what his intentions are. So I went on to say, I'm not going to hide my agenda. I want to stop trafficking then and now and always have. I also want to stop the violence against people within the sex industry. I want to stop rape. I want to stop murder. We need to stop racism too, because too many people are being profiled and targeted. I want to stop marginalizing, stigmatizing, and silencing an entire demographic of people who want to be heard. I am a survivor and I want to be heard. Someone hear what I'm saying, because there's a lot of confusion in the world. I want sustainable community opportunities. And if the views of love and compassion and learning and growth and understanding, they make me a pimp or they make me the pimp lobby, so be it. I have been called so much worse. And now we go back to the Bible. It was interesting, as that was happening, I started really thinking about Joseph in the Bible and his relationship with Pharaoh, because I realized that Joseph had a very unique relationship. And I was like, why am I being treated like this? Why? Why can't they understand that I just am doing the best that I can to change the world? And I'm listening and I'm learning, and there are a lot of people within the sex industry. But that while I was being trafficked, I was what's called a bottom bitch. Essentially, I earned my traffickers respect, or it's not respect, trust, not trust. I hustled my ass off. I made enough money and I obeyed because I didn't like to see people die or beaten. That's how it actually went down. And so I did his bidding for him. In fact, I recruited the girl that I talk about in here. I recruited the girl who he killed because I didn't make enough money one day. Sometimes you don't see the chains. Actually, most of the time you don't. Because I was a product. And if I was dirty and chained up, I sure as hell couldn't have made that $1,000 a day, because the niche of people who actually want to buy that type of person is really, really small in comparison to the rest of the sex industry. So I'm going to tell you what I learned from Joseph, and I'm actually reading from my book. This is page 123, and it says chapter 37 of Genesis details the betrayal of Joseph's brothers when they sold him to the Midianites, who then sold him to Egypt, to the house of Potiphar. These words, names, an officer of Pharaoh. While serving his master, Joseph, Potiphar, God blessed Joseph and did everything he did was more successful than ever before, giving him great power within his master's home. When Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, he resisted. Infuriated, she went to Potiphar and accused Joseph of trying to have sex with her. Joseph was sent to prison, where he was soon placed in charge of other prisoners because of God's blessing. So I think it's pretty easy to agree that Joseph was enslaved. He had been sold multiple times, he was enslaved, but God's blessing was on him. Because his blessing was on him, he was soon placed in charge of other prisoners. After years of imprisonment, Joseph was called on by the Pharaoh to interpret dreams, thus earning his trust. The Pharaoh placed Joseph over the entire land of Egypt. The Pharaoh told Joseph, I am Pharaoh. this is a quote, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all of the land of Egypt." So Pharaoh, while still enslaving Joseph, gave Joseph massive power over the land. The Pharaoh changed Joseph's identity, sounds a lot like what my pimp did, gave him a wife, and changed his appearance, so much so that Joseph's brothers didn't even recognize him years later. Was Joseph a free man or was he a slave? He ruled an entire country, but was he free to leave? What do you think Pharaoh would have done to him if Joseph had tried to return home? So many times when I see what the media has to say, oh my goodness, this is quite a rant. I'm sweating like crazy. So many times when we see the media and we see this woman who is an awful trafficker, or man who is an awful trafficker, and then you read more down the article and you realize there was someone else and there were other people in control and all this other stuff. How many times does that happen? How many times do we not see the full story in the media because we're only being told a small amount of the story? And yet we demonize and we vilify people for making decisions when there is not any possible good or healthy decision, when they're facing horrible consequences everywhere they look. So, what is human trafficking? So this is actually a portion of a presentation that I did years ago. I had a program called Sex Sells Training. And it's because I have a deep love for marketing. I have been an entrepreneur for 23 years. I love seeing why and how things sell. And what Sex Sells Training was, it was really defining the sex industry, sex trafficking and sex work. And so I was like, I'm not even going to cut and paste my old logo out. I'm just going to let it be there. Sex Sells Training no longer exists. I just stole an old PowerPoint because it seemed like the right thing to do. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is typically broken down into categories. You have forced or bonded labor, child soldiers, domestic servitude, and sex trafficking. Each of the categories includes men, women, children, transgender, everyone, all types of people, all colors, and it exists all over the world. Now, one of the problems that I have with these definitions, and we're going to go through some definitions real quick, is that there is a lot of conflict between all the different definitions, and sex trafficking has been like earmarked and pulled out and somehow demonized as like the worst of the worst types of trafficking, when if you look at the global statistics, labor trafficking, especially in manufacturing, agriculture, the numbers are astronomically higher than sex trafficking or trafficking into the sex industry. And so I really want that to be a point noted, that trafficking into the sex industry is really a very small segment of trafficking, but because sex sells, that is why it is focused on. It's sensational. People are like, oh, the little girls are being hurt. And so because it's sensational, because it's marketing, we're only focusing or seeing in media a very small amount of trafficking. And that's actually what we're going to dive into. And I'm going to talk really specifically about the sex industry in the US. And so understand that we're going from like big picture down, 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 getting smaller and smaller. So mediums in the sex industry. I think of mediums like an art. So in art, you have like acrylic paint, you have pencil, you have all these different things, but it's what you use to create art. So the sex industry has lots of different mediums as well. There's lots of different places where the sex industry exists. Strip clubs, escort agencies, porn, dungeons, brothels, internet, in-call, out-call, private networks, like phone sex, text sex, chat rooms, chat bots, hotel lounges, like it's everything. These are just mediums. There are thousands and thousands of ways to sell sexual pleasure. So what we have is all these different things that become demonized when really they're just selling sexual pleasure. So we have these different mediums. Using a medium to describe the sex industry or someone within the sex industry. Oh, they're just a this. Oh, they're just a whore. Oh, they're just a stripper. Oh, they're just a sex trafficking survivor. It grossly simplifies this multi-billion-dollar industry that is so incredibly complex. We must seek to understand the individuals within the industry rather than just focusing on the medium. Like, Craigslist is a great example. Backpage is a great example. Focusing on the medium. Like, if we take away all of the internet sites, it's going to go away. That is so not true. It just moves to a different medium. If you want to actually address it, let's talk about the root sexual issues here. So talking about the mediums is generally just irrelevant because it's a root issue that's much deeper than it. It's like talking about Band-Aids on bullet wounds. Like, it's not very effective. So we have all these terms used for labeling those who provide sexual services. Most of the terms are defined either by the lawmakers or by the culture. And see, I had the arrow going, the terms sex trafficking and sex work. Those are terms that have been created to define things. When I was being trafficked, I thought I was just a hoe. That's a term. And so our culture and our lawmakers give us these terms. So in the US, we're going to go into some laws real quick. In the US, trafficking, severe forms of trafficking in persons, this is part of the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000. And before I even get into this, I want you guys to realize that there are already tons of laws that protect people against violence and against rape and against murder. You don't need new laws to stop people from murdering people. They already exist. We don't need new laws for rape because rape is already illegal. Same with violence. Like, you can't beat someone up and go, oh, that doesn't work because she's trafficked. No, beating someone up is just illegal. Violence is illegal. We don't need new laws for that. So this is how the US defines trafficking, sex trafficking. Severe forms of trafficking in person. Sex trafficking in which a commercial sexual act, I want to stop right there because it is the commercial aspect that makes trafficking different than sexting, than blackmail, than bullying, than being tricked into showing your boobs online. Like, there's so many different things that all have different definitions. Trafficking specifically has a commercial aspect. There has to be an exchange of value. So it's induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which a person has induced to perform such a sex act that is not yet obtained 18 years of age. So what that means is it's force, fraud, or coercion, a commercial sex act, or if they're under 18. So what that means is even if there is no trafficker, if you are a minor having commercial sex acts, you can actually be charged with trafficking yourself. Think on that for a minute. It's real, it happens. It's shocking. Here's where it gets icky. Because the United Nations has a completely different definition. So our definition from the US to the UN, they don't line up. Because that part where if you're under 18, if you're a minor, that doesn't exist in the UN definition. It says trafficking in persons shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power for a position of vulnerability, or of the giving and receiving of payments, or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation shall include at a minimum, the exploitation of the prostitution of others, or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. The definitions of severe forms of trafficking in persons or trafficking in persons are entirely different. And who is correct? Really, it's a pissing contest I don't want to be involved with. So I created my own definitions that are incredibly practical because something has to make sense, right? We have to figure out how to stop this because the government's not going to save us. They can't even figure out the definitions. So sex work, here's my definitions. For whatever reason, the individual made the choice to enter the sex industry and they have the free will to exit this sex industry. Pretty simple, right? Sex trafficking or trafficking into the sex industry, which is what I prefer to call it because I actually view labor of all forms. Like I did sex work for a number of years, have not in 20 years. Just to be clear, because I get called a whore quite frequently. People. You may or may not have a choice to enter the sex industry, and you may or may not have a choice to exit because of force, fraud, or coercion. So it's really easy. You have sex work where there's free choice for whatever reason, and there's trafficking into the sex industry because for me, labor is labor, and we have men working in caves, probably oil fields too. I was thinking about the mines, the coal miners, and the effect on their body versus the sexual trafficking that I experience. Like, who has it worse? Why do we have a contest over who has the worst? We have a problem with stigma. So I prefer to call it trafficking into the sex industry. That was a little side rant. Sex work is voluntary, trafficking is not. I try to keep it really, really simple because the more practical, the more simple the terms are, the easier it is for us to actually come to an agreement and change things. So here's one of the problems. Here we have people who are trafficked. Here we have like the free willing sex workers. There is very little overlap. There is overlap, but there's very little. And it's because the sex industry is a massive, massive industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so people who are sex workers hang out with sex workers. People who are trafficked hang out with other people who are trafficked. Like, there's some overlap, but really it's a massive, huge industry. And it's like trying to find a needle in the haystack, but there is some. And if you have trouble finding access, it's because of the laws. We're going to explain that soon. But we have these people who provide sexual services. And when you're looking at them, you can't tell whether they're trafficked. You can't tell whether they're a willing sex worker. And whatever they say, whatever they say is going to be marketing because they either need to pay rent or pay their pimp or something in between, because it's really complicated and you don't know until you've established trust, heard their life, know what's going on. Like, it's complicated. So we have in the circle down below people who provide sexual services. At the top, we have people who are of free choice. I know lots of them that are willingly in it. In fact, the woman who, Carol Lee, is the woman who coined the phrase sex work. She has been in the sex industry for like 40, 50 years. Like, I remember seeing her on the Geraldo show in her American flag dress when I was like 10 or 11 years old. Like, she is an amazing woman and has written a book called The Unrepentant Whore. And really, it's so powerful. It's about the stigma that she faced and her journey and her activism. It's quite powerful. But there are lots of people who made the choice to be in. Now you go all the way down to the bottom and you have people who are locked in cages, who are chained up. There are those, and there is everything in between. Circumstance, maybe a child is sick, maybe they were homeless, maybe they needed something. We have the survival sex, we have blackmail, we have fraud, we have trickery, we have threats. There are so many different options within the sex industry because it's massive. So we're still talking about people who provide sexual services. Here, this was powerful. I started down on the force side, and then I migrated up to the choice side. Some people start on the choice side, end up getting trafficked. Then they get away from their traffic. They stay in choice for a while. Then they go down here. Then they go down here. Like, lives are complicated and they're mushy. And it's not like circumstances change. That's why relationships are so important. You just have to know people. And you have to build trust and you have to establish things. It's complicated. I know so many survivors whose pathway within the sex industry looks like this and 10 times more complex than this, because it can change day by day by day, because the sex industry is an underground industry. It's really hard to track. So there are 150 shades of gray, way more than 50. The anti-trafficking and sex worker rights movement, both sides want trafficking to stop. But they have to be included in the conversations, because what affects one affects the other. Hands down, across the board. It always, 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 if you're making laws that affect trafficking survivors, when the FASFA, I said those wrong. When those laws happened a few years ago, the anti-trafficking laws, it absolutely destroyed the lives of so many people who were just trying to provide for their families, who were just trying to work, who were just trying to find resources. And it just, how much more needy do they suddenly become when they can't provide for their family? That's why we don't talk about the mediums as much. Like, the mediums are just the mediums. They're always going to change. How sex is sold is always going to change. If you want to actually change the roots of trafficking, you have to go to the roots of sexuality, the roots of humanity. Why are we buying sex? Why are we selling sex? What's going on? Where are the indicators? And now I want to talk about the laws, because the laws are the reason why trafficking survivors are criminalized. It's the reason why sex workers are criminalized. But there's a lot of stigma. So let me see, here it is. This was a section also in my book. This is page 155 of Everything I Know I Learned from My Pimp. And it was a tongue-in-cheek article that I wrote, but I was really wanting people to understand the laws and the laws around the sex industry. So I'm just going to read it to you. In the eyes of the law, sex workers and trafficked individuals are the same thing, prostitutes. There are some states making changes for trafficked individuals who are under the age of 18 years of age, but for the vast majority of law enforcement officials, all people selling sex, whether by force, trafficking, or by choice sex work, are prostitutes. For many people, just having a conversation about prostitution and the law is uncomfortable. I understand. We are talking about selling sex. It sparks emotion, but what I want is to have a rational conversation about criminalization, legalization, and decriminalization without the stigma of selling sex. So we're going to talk about selling oranges. Yes, oranges, the round orange-colored fruit that makes a delicious mimosa. So we have criminalization of selling oranges. This is the current law in the US. So if I were selling oranges instead of selling sex, we're just doing a fun little analogy right here. I have oranges. As long as my oranges are fully matured, I can give my oranges away. I can show adults my oranges online and they can admire my beautiful oranges. I can do whatever I want with my mature oranges as long as I don't sell my oranges. I can give them to anyone, and as long as they are mature, I can give them to anyone as long as they are mature. I can post photos and videos of my oranges. I can sell photos and videos of my oranges as long as they don't buy my actual oranges. If I decide to sell my oranges, that's illegal. If someone buys my oranges, that's illegal. If someone profits from the sale of my oranges, that's illegal. If I choose to sell my oranges or someone forces me to sell my oranges, I am now a criminal. Now, if someone steals my oranges, I cannot have the protection of law enforcement because you're a criminal. If someone throws my oranges on the ground and smashes them, beating the crap out of me, I cannot have the protection of law enforcement. If a psychopathic serial killer lumberjack cuts down my entire orange grove, killing every tree, they may not be charged because according to the law, I should not have been selling my oranges. If I see someone being forced to sell oranges, I am unable to report it because I would be charged with illegally selling oranges. Because I have sold oranges, the hands of justice are tied and I am unable to protect my oranges, my orange trees, or others who are selling oranges. So up next, we have the legalization of selling oranges, which is the Swedish model or the Nordic model. This gets tossed around a lot in anti-trafficking circles, that it's where you criminalize the buyer, but you legalize and tax services for the seller. Yay, I'm free to sell my mature oranges. Hooray, mimosas for everyone. Wait, you can't buy my oranges because that's illegal. When I legally sell my oranges, law enforcement waits around the corner from my fruit stand to arrest you for buying my oranges, making it more difficult for me to sell my oranges. If I pay rent with money from selling oranges or sell oranges from a rented apartment, that is illegal because my landlord profited from the sale of my oranges and I face eviction. If I hire someone to help protect my orange grove, that's illegal also. If I decide I need a partner to help protect my oranges and they also sell oranges, that is illegal because orange co-ops are illegal. If I sell oranges to provide for my children, I may be deemed an unfit parent and lose custody of my children. If I see someone being forced to sell oranges, or if someone smashes or steals my oranges, rape, I'm not inclined to report for fear of further harassment of my orange buyers by law enforcement. If I am poor, I may not have access to tests or protective barriers to protect my oranges from deadly diseases. Legalizing the selling of oranges does not make my life safer. As long as it's illegal for people to buy my oranges, it doesn't make people safer, as long as it's illegal for people to buy my oranges. Also called legalization, selling oranges in Nevada adds a twist of lime to this mimosa. I can sell my oranges and you can buy my oranges, but only in specific areas. However, I have to submit my oranges to the power and control, to the powers that control the oranges within the local regulations to see if they are good enough. Only certain people are granted the rights to organize the protected sale of oranges, causing fruit stands to only be controlled by the elite. Then we have the last model. I'm almost there, y'all. Decriminalizing the selling of oranges. This is the New Zealand model. I can sell my mature oranges and you can buy my oranges. It's a business agreement handled above the law. If I see someone being forced to sell oranges, I'm free to report without fear of repercussions. If an ethical orange buyer sees someone who is being forced to sell oranges, they are free to report without fear of repercussions. If my oranges are stolen, raped, or harmed, beaten, I am free to report without fear of repercussions. In addition, if there are resources available to assist me when or if I choose to quit selling my oranges, that would be hugely beneficial, especially if I don't have a criminal record from the time of selling my oranges. Like I have. like so many other trafficking survivors have. We have criminal records that prevent us from actually living our lives normally like regular human beings because we were the victims of a crime. Now I know decriminalizing sounds scary. You're like, everybody's gonna start selling oranges, and what about the children? What if I fear my children grow up and sell their oranges? This is not an issue of legislation for individuals who are already buying and selling oranges. But this must be addressed within parenting while addressing the systemic issues that may lead someone to a life of choosing to sell their oranges or being forced to sell their oranges. These systemic issues include poverty, racism, gender inequality, social and economic class, housing, lack of educational resources at an affordable cost, medical and mental health care at an affordable cost, making minimum wage a living wage. How about resources for parents? All of these issues must be addressed on a community level rather than within federal or state legislation. Utilizing an analogy, equating the selling and buying of sex to oranges simplifies the complex issues within legislation. However, removing the stigma of selling sex is critical in understanding the ramifications of legalization and how we can best protect both sex workers and individuals who are being trafficked. Trafficked individuals and sex workers are more susceptible to acts of violence, rape, and murder because of their inability to report a crime. Do you know how many times I was raped while being trafficked or being a sex worker? It's insane. And the laws actually prevent me from reporting. And this isn't something that just happened in the 90s when I was being trafficked. It's every single day. There are thousands of survivors, probably millions. I don't know, you can't find numbers because it's an underground market. If you can't find trafficking survivors in the US, it's because you're hitting it from the entirely wrong angle. It's marketing. If the messaging doesn't work of marketing, your messaging is wrong. Change the messaging, everything else changes. It's because there's so much shame about being a trafficking survivor, about being a whore, about being a prostitute, about being forced to change, about doing everything wrong and being less than and belittled and patted on the head because you don't know what you're talking about. I sure as hell do know what the hell I'm talking about because I have spent 23 years of my life with a scarlet letter. And I have spent, wow, I'm 41. I started being sexually abused when I was 4 years old. That is a huge chunk of my life that I have been dealing with sexual issues. It's time to listen to survivors. It's time to come to the table, put the judgments aside, and say what actually causes change. After our exile from the anti-trafficking movement, from churches, due to compassion, due to trying to be a voice of reason and just say, come on, y'all, we can do better. We ended up leaving the anti-trafficking movement, the church, and ultimately my faith. But I'm not here to deconvert anyone, which is why I teach from the Bible. Because it's a great book. Like, I'm not here for that. I'm here to come to the middle ground because I have a deep love for humanity. And there is a massive injustice. Children are not able to report. Adults are not able to report because you lock us up. It's time for change. But when I went public 11 years ago, I was thinking about rescuing people too. I was wrong also. And so that's actually what's coming next, is we're going to talk about the rescue industry, research, the rescues, and the results. But this has been long enough. Thank you all for watching. I will talk to you very soon, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And pick up my book. You'll, it'd be helpful. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.